So as I mentioned earlier, our sort of theme for February that we took as a starting point for today's service is inclusion. While thinking about what to write for reflection on the topic of inclusion, I considered so many different possibilities because I think this is actually a really complex concept. I started by thinking of our political landscape and my involvement in dialogue and bridging work with organizations like Braver Angels. And the topic of boundaries also came up, as in, when is including someone maybe not such a good idea? I could tell you some horror stories about roommates I've had whose giant red flags I ignored before adding them to my lease. Maybe it was not such a good idea to include them in my home. With so many directions to go in, I did what I always do when in doubt, which is to consult an etymology dictionary. So bear with me for a moment while I get kind of linguistically nerdy on you. I found that the word inclusion entered the English language around the year 1600, and although it is used to mean active making a part of, it comes from the Latin inclusionum, meaning a shutting up or confinement. The word include originally meant to shut someone or something in, imprison, or confine. It comes from the same Proto-Indo-European root as words like close, enclave, and seclude. I think we usually imagine being inclusive as a kind of expansiveness, but this word history indicates the exact opposite, which actually makes a lot of sense to me. It tracks with the experiences I've had in some activist networks that claim to want a world that works for more people, but end up welcoming only a specific group of people with certain niche beliefs and jargon. And the song line of "Why are people on the internet so mean?" feels personally relevant to me because I'm going to ask you if you've heard of the Great Asterisk Wars of 2014. No one? So this was a huge argument, mostly online, amongst people who identify mostly as trans or queer, interested in social justice, about whether the word trans should have an asterisk after it when printed or typed. And those who argued for the asterisk claimed that it was more inclusive. It was meant to remind people that trans includes a wide variety of people who may identify as transgender or transsexual and non-binary, as well as trans man or trans woman. Those who argued against the asterisk claimed that it was unnecessary because the word trans already encompassed these identities, and that this asterisk was actually othering people. Both camps saw the other one's orthography, for lack of a better word, as dehumanizing. Writing about this and imagining sharing it with you was difficult. I was reminded of immersing myself in online spaces where I could get caps lock screamed at that a disagreement about orthography or acronyms was tantamount to killing trans people or some other people of a certain identity. My heart beats faster thinking about it, and it's harder to breathe. It's harder to think. I really immersed myself in these spaces, which, was my choice. I now think that there's so much trauma ricocheting around social justice spaces, and the dynamics that emerge in those environments activated my own trauma responses. And including that I too caps lock screamed at people sometimes for not going along with some novel turn of phrase or concept that I thought was the right one. What does this have to do with inclusion? Well, I'm thinking that if being inclusive actually means to shut in, to enclose, why do we shut ourselves in? To keep ourselves safe, right? From the elements, from outside threats, and how can those threats be identified? The logic behind these really intense arguments about language, as someone who's participated in them, might be that if someone is in the know and uses the right lingo, then they're a safe person to be included, to be shut up or confined with. At least that's the idea. But I found that language can be a poor indicator for who is safe to be around. For example, just last week at Caring Committee, we talked about how people who are, or people whom identify with being a disabled person or a differently abled person or a person with a disability, these are all terms that people find meaningful or empowering or that recognize their humanity and their experience in different ways. My partner also has great stories about an ex-girlfriend's incredibly loving and supportive grandmother who would ask questions about their friend like, how's the transgendering going? It's just awkward wording, but she was full of love. I don't have a great segue here, but one insight I've had recently is that there are certain contexts in which we don't get to choose who is included. I can have boundaries about who lives with me, who I work with, who I partner with, but I don't get to choose who I share this planet with. We are all shut up or confined, included here on planet Earth together. And this is also true at the national level. Unless I become an expatriate, I am shut up or included with all my fellow Americans, not just the ones I see eye to eye with. I was thinking about the pain I used to feel being told, love it or leave it, by people who didn't appreciate my activism against the Iraq War or other policies I opposed. But those people didn't have the power to make me leave, nor do I have the power to make them leave. And even at the local level, I can't make people who vote for a different city councilor than me go away. So I've been on a journey of accepting this reality, and that's led me to re-engage with my fellow citizens who have very different viewpoints than me, which can be difficult. There are organizations working on this, like Braver Angels, which I mentioned at the beginning, and I appreciate the spaces that they create for a number of reasons. One is that they have group agreements and moderators that help keep those conversations respectful, which can be as people say, the personal is political, so strong feelings come up. And I hold pretty tight boundaries about how I engage with people in these types of conversations in unmoderated spaces because of just how intense it is and how it can devolve. But another reason that I appreciate dialoguing across divides is that it helps me feel safer. I'm sometimes really able to connect with humans who may vote differently than me, but see that they're not monsters. By encountering their humanity, I can connect with a reality where being shut up on this planet together isn't quite as scary. And maybe there's a little hope that we can find ways to include each other that we haven't even imagined yet. And this may be a long shot, you might be thinking, but I'm going to keep trying because lacking a spaceship or supreme sorceress powers to bend other people to my will, I don't see any alternative. So that's my reflection on inclusion today, and we will now have a homily from Rev. Alexandri.
I've been asked many times whether this is the Aquarian age, and it's
Okay,
all
we just got sound.
just got sound. Okay, let me start again. I've been asked many times whether this is the Aquarian age, and it's all just beginning, or if this is the Armageddon, and this is the end. And I have to admit, I don't know. Whichever way it goes, my work is the same. My work is to quiet my mind, open my heart, and relieve suffering wherever I find it. And relieve suffering wherever I find it. These are words from Ram Dass. I am the Reverend Alexandre da Silva Soto. These days I'm going simply by Rev. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm a brown, exiled immigrant from Brazil. I am in my early 50s. My hair is getting grayer and grayer every day. I need glasses to read. I'm wearing a camis, a beige camis, and an earthy tone ochre shawl. It was an absolute gift to work with Megan in preparation for this gathering time with you. The topic inclusion can be taken very lightly, and it can be done in ways that um, might convey what could be perceived as inclusion, but it might be more like the gathering of a Crayola box. And that can be seen as rather superficial. So we got to talk quite a bit about our personal experiences of inclusion and exclusion, because oftentimes things are clearer in just a position to its opposite or its uh, near enemy, which is a Buddhist term. So it was a great gift to have the conversations that we had and exchanging the stories that we exchanged and resources and articles. And the terminology social justice purity came up, and I encourage Megan to really, yeah, go for it, to name it. That sometimes liberal spaces or spaces that um, proclaim an intention of including can be um, exclusionary. I shared maybe a little bit of this with you before, but I was shamed, literally, figuratively and literally shamed and ostracized, not only by the far right homophobes in the United Methodist Church, but also within the centrists and progressive wings, and even more painfully within the far left movement that I have built in the UMC. I was eviscerated on a global denominational scale from 2016 until I was finally pushed out in December 2020. I was barely physically, emotionally, and spiritually alive, if I were to be very frank, transparent with you all. A 9-year relationship with the love of my life was obliterated. My spirit was broken, my mental health was shattered. I was left without a reasonable and sustainable way to practice my ministry, which in turn impacted my housing security and financial stability. And in 2021, middle of the year, I was blessed with a potential refuge in Unitarian Universalist movement. But unfortunately, the exclusionary phobic, and you can add whatever you want, whatever your experience encourages you to add before the phobic, and also cannibalistic practices, the eating of our own that I had experienced within the United Methodist Church, unfortunately, didn't seem to be completely absent in Unitarian Universalist spaces. So I make these references not because I have had any particular experiences with you all at Chico. All my experiences were absolutely delightful. It was like dating. We were never really married. We were just dating. I would pop in once a month and would have a lovely time together. Sometimes some difficult conversations, and I want to also acknowledge that in terms of inclusion and exclusion, I remember how grateful I was to witness the congregation coming together about um, a particular circumstance in the congregation that a person had been very disruptive. The behaviors were very disruptive. It was, they weren't just statements that uh, were of differing opinions. The behavior itself, not just the opinions, but what had been expressed and practiced was causing a great deal of harm in the congregation, and it was going on for quite a few years. And this story is not mine it's not for me to get into it, but I want to acknowledge the experience I had with you all of seeing the community coming together and having a call-in practice of inviting a member of the congregation to think and examine what is one's right to hold as opinions and positions, and when opinions, positions, but worse yet, actions can exclude other people. So to me, what I tend to focus much more is uh, when arguments for inclusion are used to secure spaces within the community for those that actually want to practice exclusion. It's a little mind bender, I, I, I think, because I had some of these experiences in school board meetings, many school board meetings that I would show up you know, and thank you for the mention of the trans community, but some, especially elected officials or religious leaders, would show up to these meetings and would say, well, my belief is that transgender people don't exist, that anybody talking about transgender or gender non-conforming ideas, concepts, or realities are grooming children, and they are abusers. And so um, then whenever opposition was expressed, the argument was made, well, you're arguing for inclusion, you want to include, but you're excluding me. I'm not able to express my views. And I think those arguments are preposterous and they're absurd, because it's not that those individuals are being excluded, they are self-excluding. And their actual words, actions, their deeds are inciting violence or erasing human beings completely and identities completely, and causing people to feel unsafe, threatened. So social justice purity is found in many liberal spaces, and I've been a victim of that. I think we need to be very mindful of when our drive to be inclusive, to be righteous, to be loving, end up creating a rigidity and a lack of grace when some of us don't know the right term, as Megan mentioned, or haven't had the exposure yet to realities that we're still confused about, or nomenclature has shifted, has changed. So there is often within liberal spaces a tendency to be too pure, too righteous, and that can push people away and diminish people's effort to learn to do better. And I I I need to name how this intention is twisted and manipulated and misappropriated for those that argue, well, men are under attack, or white people are under attack, or and you name it. Whatever, whatever identity that holds a little bit more power and power over, it is argued, you're excluding me because I don't believe transgender people exist. Like, well, no, I'm not. This, not excluding you. Your practice excludes other people, and my job is to side with the most marginalized. My job is to pay attention to those that are completely silenced, erased. And I will quote Alexis Pauline Gumbs from Healing Justice Lineages. Freedom is not freedom without care. Freedom is not freedom without care. So inclusion comes with a responsibility to maintain the inclusion of others. So claiming and arguing that one needs to be excluded, that one needs to be included, it's not a carte blanche for one to say whatever one wants to say. It's the freedom of speech that has been abused in our country, because freedom of speech needs to be within the bounds of not inciting violence, of not harming other people with our words. So the problem with arguments that are made for the inclusion of what is actually exclusionary and beliefs and practices is a very slippery slope and very dangerous. I'm glad that both Megan and I are coming from different points, different cautionary terms, cautionary stories, and encouragements for us to find that balance. When the alienating of the ones claiming that they are alienated, when they are just being questioned and held accountable for alienating the truly marginalized ones, I think it's really important that we pay close attention to it. And at the same time, we need to offer grace and call people in, invite people in if they slipped up, if they made a mistake, if they didn't have enough time to study a particular reality and particular truth. Far-right practitioners have perfected the mind-bending argument of, well, you're excluding me. I voted, for genocide, or I voted for, taking away women's rights or reproductive rights and immigrants' rights, and you name it. You go down the list. Why you're excluding me? Well, your actions excluded yourself from a community that is meant to be a safe community for all. So I'm all for imperfect allyship. There's so many identities and so many marginalized identities that I cannot speak from a personal experience. So I'm to work on being a good ally, and there's no thing as a perfect ally. So I'm all for that. And I'm all for a big tent philosophy, a tent that brings peoples of different opinions, different views, different ways of seeing and going about. Yet, we must make sure that we are giving refuge, especially to those that are silenced, those that are marginalized, those that are being oppressed, and those that are still out in the elements outside this big tent. Because comforting the comfortable at the expense of the marginalized favors surface level aesthetic of negative peace, but seldom engenders social or spiritual maturity. So it is the hard work of really practicing inclusion with justice, with mindfulness, with care. So I will stop right here, and I will offer a snippet of a collective safety ritual. A collective safety ritual that was offered by Adrienne Marie Brown, and some of you might be familiar with the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. And this ritual was offered during a multi-faith prayer circle held during the presidential inauguration. So the encouragement, and I'm passing this encouragement to you, this exercise to you, is to write down or to bring to mind, to think the names of those you commit to protecting. Who are those you commit to protecting? Think of specific names or targeted groups. Who are those who are committed to protecting within a big tent? Who are those that you're committed to protecting there outside a tent? You want to invite in and make sure that conditions allow for them to exist within the community. It can be a short list, can be a long list, but it needs to be a commitment. Who are those that you are committing to offer your resources, your time, your effort, your prayers, your protection? So let's take a brief moment and think. One person, two people, a whole community, including yourself and maybe some of your identities that still feel very endangered depending on where you are. Maybe the commitment is to protect that identity of yours in dangerous spaces. And now I'm going to offer some words by Adrienne Marie Brown for this ritual. We are each other's safety, right now and every day. Decide who you will protect, yourself, your own, and who else. It's time to cover all that we love, land, creature, place, person. Intertwine your roots with mine. In this way, our lives become miracles. There will be strangers, they will become comrades. We will each say our needs, we will learn to let community come closer. Every part of us is a shield. Our words, our trust, our hearts, our bodies in action, and the freedom to think of ourselves. We are the adaptation no oppressor can imagine. Our love is water, form, shifting power, river, vapor, life. We flood each other with belonging. We choose our freedom. We keep each other's souls intact. Safer than any cage of empire. We know something better is coming. We are each other's safety. We see each other's freest selves. We will hold on tight, in public, in private, over and underground, and we'll never let go. We'll never let go. We'll never let go. And in closing, I translated some words from a song, from a Brazilian song. And this translation I did as right after watching 80 Brazilian immigrants being handcuffed and chained, deported out of this country, out of our country. The title of the song is Samba da Utopia, Utopian Samba. And I'll read some verses in Portuguese too. Se o mundo ficar pesado, eu vou pedir emprestado a palavra poesia. If the world gets heavy, I will borrow the word poetry. Se o mundo emborrecer, eu vou rezar para chover palavra sabedoria. If the world gets dumb, I will pray for rain of words of wisdom. Se o mundo andar para trás, vou escrever uma carta, a palavra rebeldia. If the world goes backwards, I will write on a poster the word rebellion. Se a gente desanimar, vou colher no pomar a palavra teimosia. If we get discouraged, I will harvest in the orchard the word persistence. Se acontecer afinal de entrar em nosso quintal a palavra tirania, if it happens after all, the word tyranny enters our backyard. Pegue o tambor e o ganzá, vamos para a rua gritar a palavra utopia. Grab the drum and the ganzá, let's go to the streets. Shout the word utopia. Beloved, may we practice a utopian inclusion, an inclusion that takes into account the divine worthiness of every sentient being, and at the same time protects the most vulnerable, protects the ones that are most vulnerable. Deep gratitude, deep peace. Blessed be. Ashe. Salam and salam.